Last week, a civil court, in response to far-right petitioners, ordered that the Dargah of Ajmer Sharif, visited by lakhs of pilgrims across religions, should be investigated for a Hindu temple allegedly underneath it. As Ajmer's Muslims prepare for the inevitable appearance of right-wing vigilantes, armed police, and the media circus, the rest of us are left to pick up this debate again. Why did medieval Muslim rulers destroy temples? What did their contemporaries think? And where does that leave us today? The answer, as we'll see, shows us that this new campaign against Ajmer Sharif is not just a denial of India's Muslim history, it's an assault on the history of India itself. One of the main justifications for digging up mosques in India is that they were supposedly built to express the subjugation of Hinduism by Islam. As such, from as early as the 20th century, Hindu elites who were seeking to gather majoritarian sentiment have piled fire and fury on conquest mosques constructed by various sultanates. But a sober appraisal of the evidence suggests that it's a stretch to claim that a horde of a few thousand Turk Muslims in the 12th century, no matter how religiously inspired, was capable of enacting a consistent policy across the expanse of northern India. After all, northern India was one of the most urban, populous and economically productive regions in all of Eurasia. Early Sultanate sources, though, produced blood-curdling numbers of temples destroyed, infidels converted and enslaved, and that sort of thing. This provided ammunition to the later British Raj as well as Hindutva proponents. But who were the Sultanate sources actually written for? In Muslim rule in medieval India, Power and Religion in the Delhi Sultanate, Pakistani historian Fuzia Farooq Ahmad presents a radical revision. The neat succession of the early Delhi Sultanate, familiar to us in textbooks, obscures its extreme volatility. Its texts were intended to impress and intimidate contemporary Muslim rivals, not Hindu audiences of the past or present. In fact, as Ahmad writes, local legends indicate that Delhi Sultanate had mixed results in its expansion attempts, and archaeology demonstrates that sultans routinely exaggerated claims of uprooting idols from various regions. Historian Peter Jackson, author of The Delhi Sultanate, A Political and Military History, also shows that local powers both within and beyond the pale of Hinduism, such as the Mayo people of Mewat, harassed Delhi's military convoys. So, to understand the bigoted stances taken by medieval Muslim sources, let's take the Sultan who built a conquest mosque at Ajmer, Qutbuddin Aibak. Rather famous today for the Qutb Minar, which he only laid the base for, Aibak had an extremely short rule of just 4 years. As Ahmad puts it, Aibak could not have been forgotten but for the fact that his slave Iltutmish consolidated the Delhi Sultanate and enshrined him in court chronicles. In his few years on the throne, Aibak was mostly in the saddle, squabbling with other Muslim chiefs. All these Turk parvenus found they could quickly legitimize themselves by making absurd claims of military success against infidels. When we compare the propaganda to the archaeology, we find that the early sultans' claims were more fiction than fact, aiming to portray them as devout Muslim rulers for a new era, independent of the declining caliphate in Iraq. Unfortunately, to fuel their competition with each other, Turk warlords were more than willing to extort their Indian subjects. As architectural historian Alka Patel writes in Architectural Cultures and Empires, the Ghurids in northern India, in the 1190s, Aibak's rival Baha al-Din Tughril built mosques in Bayana in eastern Rajasthan. Not to be outdone, in 1199, Aibak demolished a Jain temple in Ajmer, which was formerly the capital of the Chahmana dynasty, and converted it to a congregational mosque. But the Turks soon found that warlordism was no way to run a state. Medieval states, like modern states, required some form of assent from their subjects, and so the early sultans turned to Sufis, mystics believed to have a direct connection to God. If the Sufi was God's representative, then by serving the Sufi, the sultan could claim to be divinely ordained. And there's no doubt that many medieval Hindus did consider the sultans to be just that, as we talked about in this video here. Now, this brings us back to Aibak's mosque at Ajmer. In the early 13th century, Khwaja Muinuddin, a sheikh of the Chishti order of mystics, settled in Ajmer. His successors later settled in Delhi, founding the important centre of Qutb Sahib in Mehrauli. Now, as Qamar ul Huda, a scholar of religions, puts it in his study, Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti's Death Festival, the Chistis tended towards simplicity and austerity. This frequently put them at odds with Delhi sultans. They also, like many Sufis of the time who we talked about here, adapted ideas from Hindu and Jain theology, such as the use of devotional music, shaving the head, and emphasis on non-violence. This brought a large and diverse following of initiates, mystics, theologians, and intellectuals. The popularity of the Ajmer Sharif soon rivaled that of the Sultanate itself. Now, in the 16th century, when the Mughal ruler Akbar finally managed to integrate Rajasthan into his Gangetic Empire, Ajmer Sharif received its most substantial expansions, including colossal cooking vessels capable of preparing tons of food for pilgrims. Gateways were added and a Mughal palace attached to the Dargah complex. But patronage was by no means limited to the Mughal royal family, or for that matter, to Muslims. Historian Rana Safvi writes in Search of the Divine Living Histories of Sufism in India that the Maratha chief Kumar Rao Scindia added residences at Ajmer as he believed the Khwaja had blessed him with a son. Structures were also built by Maharani Baizabai Scindia in the 18th century, Ajit Singh of Jodhpur in 1709, and the Maharaja of Baroda in 1800. In fact, the Khwaja's title of Gharib Nawaz managed to reach Manipur in the late 18th century and was used as a regnal title of the conquering Hindu king Pamheba. So, in Ajmer Sharif's long history, India's far right seems to think that 800 years of pilgrimage, patronage and devotion by lakhs of Indians across the spectrum of caste, class, religion and gender don't matter. Serious theological engagement between Muslim and Hindu mystics doesn't matter. Attempts by immigrants to adapt themselves to the new culture doesn't matter. There's nothing that a pre-modern Muslim ruler, teacher or devotee could ever do to be accepted as Indian by the far right, even if pre-modern Hindus accepted or even worshipped them, which we talked about here, simply because some warlords destroyed temples. Essentially, in 2024, the far right seeks to settle a score on behalf of a medieval shrine belonging to the Chahamana dynasty, which most likely was demolished for a tussle among rulers who have long since disappeared. It's difficult to express the absurdity of this position, whether on logical or historical grounds. This is not a righting of historic wrongs, so let's not be taken in by the grandiose claims. This is a direct assault on India's history to score points, no matter what the cost is to our social fabric. There's no justification for trampling the rights and beliefs of millions of Indian citizens in the name of politically engineered sentiments. I'm sure this is a controversial opinion, so if you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Follow us everywhere on social media, and you can find me on Instagram @Anirudh and on Twitter @Kanisetti. We'll see you next week.